Well, the Supreme Court in the United Kingdom has finally agreed to hear one of the most important cases of our lifetime, and it directly addresses the question about what actually happened on 9/11, what brought down the Twin Towers. One of Britain's own sons was killed that day, and the British family has been demanding answers, which they are rightfully allowed to do under the law, and the Supreme Court will finally hear this case, but they need to raise some money in order to do this. Ted Walter is Executive Director of the International Center for 9/11 Justice, and he joins us now. Ted, great to see you. And of course, Matt Campbell has been on the show. His brother killed on 9/11 in those Twin Towers. And maybe you can just kind of update our audience here on, first of all, why the British government is sort of compelled under the law to actually look into what happened, unlike what the United States has.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me, Clayton. Essentially, in Britain, when someone dies in unusual circumstances, there's an inquest that is held to determine the cause of death. And in the case of 9/11, there were almost 70 British 9/11 victims, and 10 of them had remains repatriated to the UK after 9/11. And so there were inquests held for all 10 of those victims, all on the same day back in 2013. It took place in a matter of 2 hours, over and done. And basically the official cause of death from that inquest was that Jeff Campbell was killed because the airplane hit the North Tower and caused it to collapse. And so shortly after, Matt Campbell and his family decided that they wanted to challenge that finding, because Matt had realized that the North Tower was brought down by controlled demolition, as you and many of your viewers know at this point.
Right. The airplanes had nothing to do with it. Right.
The airplanes had nothing to do with it. Exactly. Right. And so there was this piece of language in the conclusion of the inquest where it said that, and the American Airlines Flight 11 caused the collapse of the tower at 10:28. And so that's what the family is challenging. And so there's a process in British law that allows a family to reopen an inquest if they have evidence that was not considered at the first inquest, or for other reasons, if the inquiry that was conducted at the first inquest was insufficient. And so they're arguing both things. They have thousands of pages of evidence that they submitted to the UK Attorney General back in 2021. And they also made a case that the coroner at the first inquest didn't investigate at all how the towers came down. And yet, not a moment of that inquest was spent actually considering that question. No evidence was brought, bearing on that question. And so on both of these grounds, they asked for the inquest to be reopened. And the UK Attorney General plays this sort of gatekeeper function where, before the family can apply to the court for the original inquest to be quashed and for there to be a new inquest, the Attorney General has to approve it, basically applying the same legal tests that the court would apply. And so the Attorney General, it took them almost 2 years to respond, and they finally did in 2023, and then again in 2024, denying the family's application. And so that's what the family is now challenging in court. They're arguing that the Attorney General's decision was unlawful, because essentially the Attorney General didn't look at any of the evidence and just asserted that it was not credible. And we're talking like 2,500 pages of evidence, eyewitness testimony, actual eyewitnesses who were there on 9/11 provided new testimony for this application. We had 6 expert witnesses provide testimony, and yet the Attorney General just said it's not credible. And so that's not lawful. And so now what's actually being litigated at the highest court in the United Kingdom is whether the Attorney General's decision can actually be reviewed by the courts. Whether the courts even have the ability to review the Attorney General's decision, or if the Attorney General is essentially above the law, and whatever decision the Attorney General makes cannot be challenged. This is an issue that's dated back decades, but now the Supreme Court in the UK is finally going to address this question that has been unresolved, and that's why it's gotten to this level, and it's going to end up being a very big story in the UK.
So Matt Campbell and his family, they lost their brother on 9/11. They're not wealthy. They're not independently wealthy where they're just rolling in millions of dollars. They're having to scrape together every penny they can in order to go before the Supreme Court. And they need to raise like a few thousand pounds, British pounds, in order to do this. I just wanted to hear at the outset, because, if people want to donate a few dollars to help? Because I think this could be one of the most important and monumental cases that we've seen in the last 100 years in front of the Supreme Court. So we'll have a link. I guess we'll put a link in our description where people can maybe go and donate. Do you have is there like a Give, Send, Go or something like that?
I think the easiest, it's on crowdfunder.co.uk, but the easiest way to find it is if people go to ic911.org. And there will be, when people see this, there will be a link right at the top that people can click on to go to Matt's crowdfunder page.
Can you give that again?
So it's ic911.org.
Okay, so if people want to donate, and again, I'm not soliciting, I'm just saying if anyone has a few dollars that want to, they only need a few £1,000s in order to bring this to the Supreme Court and actually be able to do this. So I just want to put that out there.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
And if I can elaborate on that, they need to raise close to £8,000 for just to file to say, yes, we want to proceed with the case. Like that's what you need to pay in order for the Supreme Court case to be initiated.
Which is outrageous.
That's an exorbitant amount just to get a case going. It's really not fair. They're going to, down the road, they're going to have to raise a lot more for attorney fees, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. It's a really unjust situation because the Campbell family, like this should be settled law. And like the courts and the attorney general should just like hash it out, or litigate it. And without the Campbell family having to pay hundreds of thousands of pounds, to pursue their case. It's really unfortunate, unfair. Nevertheless, the public has stepped up to the plate every single time the Campbell family has needed to raise money. So thank you so much to everyone who's donated or who will donate.
And it is really a David versus Goliath situation here. What do we know about this attorney general? Is this guy compromised? I mean, he won't even look at the 2,500 pages of evidence, eyewitness testimony that confirms that these buildings were brought down by a controlled demolition, and he just says, nope, I'm not gonna look at it.
Yeah, so it was several attorney generals have passed through that office in the time since the Campbell family submitted the application. The one who rejected the application in January 2024 was Victoria Prentice. She was a part of the Tory government at that time. Since then, the Labor took office in the middle of 2024. And we were hoping that the new Attorney General, Richard Hermer, would actually rescind that decision and just allow the case to go forward, which is what should have happened. Unfortunately, he didn't. And so he's standing by the previous Attorney General's decision inexplicably, really. There's nothing to go on here. This is clearly a political decision. And they know that if we prevail at the Supreme Court, if Matt Campbell and his family prevail at the Supreme Court, it will then go back to the High Court to decide whether the decision is unlawful. And I think we're very likely going to win at that. So likely that the Attorney General at that point, if we went to the Supreme Court on this legal issue, that they will just rescind the decision and allow the inquest to go forward. What do we know about him? I mean, he's been, as far as British politicians go, he's been decent on issues like Israel and Gaza, for example. And he's known to be, let's say, more forward thinking when it comes to British law, and that's his background. But as soon as he became a part of the current government in the UK, he's kind of gone backwards on those things. And it's really embarrassing to his legacy that he's trying to argue that the Attorney General decisions on this type of matter should be above the law, should be that the courts should not be able to review it. And hopefully they're going to lose because, I mean, not hopefully, obviously that's the hope, but there's a good chance that the courts will decide in the Campbell family's favor because they don't want to set a precedent where the Attorney General is above the law.
Let's talk about some of the evidence before we let you go here, Ted, which is if this Attorney General actually looked at the evidence, this overwhelming body of evidence, and if someone is new to this subject and they're like, oh, of course, airplanes brought down the towers. No, they didn't. Maybe you could walk through some of the testimony and evidence that sits in that folder that Attorney General basically refused to look at.
Yeah, well, the most powerful evidence we have is what anybody can see by looking at the video, which is, first of all, that the top of the building comes down almost in free fall, right? It just telescopes down. And if the top were actually crushing the structure below it, it would be slowing down constantly. It would not be like a smooth, almost free fall acceleration drop. You also see the building, you see the top actually disintegrate before the rest of the building even starts to destruct. The top itself is gone, and then you start to see the outward destruction of the rest of the building, basically all of the concrete being pulverized and all the steel being shattered, the frame being shattered and ejected hundreds of feet in all directions. And you can see, squibs or, explosions shooting out of the exterior of the building, well below the so-called collapse front. So you can see the explosions happening. Anybody who can get over the cognitive dissonance, the psychological, propaganda that we were fed on 9/11 and since, can see that this building is being blown up and not collapsing with the top sort of crushing the bottom floor by floor. We also have extreme heat in the rubble. We have molten metal pouring out of the South Tower for 7 minutes before it starts to come down. This is evidence of incendiaries, and specifically thermite being used to weaken the structure, and nanothermite. We have a team of scientists who discovered and published this paper in 2009, documenting the discovery of unreacted nanothermitic material in multiple samples of World Trade Center dust. So we've got the actual, the weapon right there in the dust. And then we have hundreds of eyewitness accounts of explosions. And several of those eyewitnesses, as I said before, gave testimony for this application, attesting that they witnessed explosions on the morning of 9/11. So the evidence is on multiple levels, and it's certainly enough to reach the very low threshold of triggering a new inquest. The threshold is supposed to be if there's any possibility that the original inquest was incorrect. And when you're providing new evidence that could possibly overturn the original conclusion, there has to be a new inquest if the family wants it. And so that's what we're fighting here.
What is the family saying? Matt Campbell and his family, what are they kind of saying privately to you about their hopes for this?
Matt and his family are very optimistic. They know that the law is very much on their side. They know that on this issue of reviewability of the Attorney General's decision, that the courts for several decades have been trending in the direction of favoring judicial review, of not allowing public officers in the UK for their decisions to be beyond judicial review. And so we think that's where the court is going to ultimately come down on this. And they're optimistic that if that happens when they go back to the high court and litigate whether the decision is actually lawful, that the court will find that it's not, because it's almost self-evident. It's blatantly evident. So they're optimistic. It's frustrating how long it's taken. It took almost 2.5 years to get a decision from the Attorney General.
Yeah.
And it's taken almost 2 years since then to get to where we are now. So I'm going to drink some water because I'm getting over a cold.
Yeah, it's been ridiculous the amount of times we've had Matt on over the years. They're just refusing to look at this. They're not answering. They're not answering. It smells, of course, like a government cover-up, right? Because if you've got MI6, you've got the CIA involved in the destruction of these towers, and we know that they work in lockstep. Of course, the government's going to step in to try to stop any kind of inquest.
Yep. That's very possible what has happened here. Whatever is motivating the Attorney General, or did motivate the Attorney General back in 2024, it was not a good faith review of the evidence of the application that the Campbell family submitted, and I think that'll be made clear. I think I'm very optimistic, as you can tell as well, and I think that while those powerful forces are pushing in the opposite direction, in this case the law is so much on the family's side, and plus I think public sentiment is turning. There's an evolution happening here where people are more open to questioning what happened on 9/11. And I think Matt Campbell, along with the many other developments we've seen related to 9/11 truth in the past year, Matt Campbell, his case is going to continue to garner attention and garner support. And by the time we get to next summer, when this hearing is supposed to happen at the Supreme Court, I think there'll be even more public support for Matt and for the issue of questioning what really happened on 9/11. And so that bodes well also.
I sure hope so. Ted Walter, thank you so much as always. Again, we'll have a link in the description below for people, but can you reiterate the website one more time?
Yep, IC911.org, which stands for International Center for 9/11 Justice. So, Great. And there you'll find a link to the crowdfunder page.
Great. If anyone wants to donate, like, again, you've got a few pennies under the couch, a few dollars, a few pounds, whatever you want to do to try to help get this moving into the Supreme Court, we appreciate it. Ted, great to see you as always. Thank you so much. Hope you feel better.
Thank you, Clayton. Thanks so much.